On the morning of October 13, 1899, the residents of Selkerk, Montana, awoke to an impossible sight that would haunt their community for generations. 7 beds in the Thornfield household lay undisturbed, their covers still tucked with military precision as they had been the night before. Yet the rooms felt as empty as abandoned graves. The 7 daughters of prominent merchant Gabriel Thornfield, Margaret, 26, Catherine, 24, twins Eleonora and Elizabeth, 22, Sarah, 20, Grace, 17, and Rebecca, just 14, had vanished without leaving so much as a footprint in the morning frost that covered their windowsills. And most disturbing of all, their nightgowns hung precisely where they had placed them before retiring, as if the sisters had simply dissolved into the autumn air. The local sheriff's report, sealed by federal order for nearly 8 decades, contained a single chilling detail that authorities refused to discuss with anyone, including the sisters' own father. Each bedroom showed evidence of having been methodically searched by someone intimately familiar with the house's layout, yet nothing whatsoever was missing, not jewelry, not clothing, not even the small amounts of money the older sisters kept in their dresser drawers. What happened to the 7 sisters of Selkerk remains one of America's most haunting and inexplicable unsolved mysteries. And the truth buried in those dusty government files reveals a conspiracy of greed, corruption, and human trafficking that reaches far deeper than anyone in that isolated Montana town dared imagine. The autumn wind that swept down from the Bitterroot Mountains and through the streets of Selkerk carried with it the mingled scents of wood smoke, fallen leaves, and the ever-present metallic tang of silver ore that had transformed this forgotten corner of Montana territory into one of the most prosperous communities between Denver and Seattle. In 1899, Selkerk was a town caught between 2 worlds: the rough-hewn frontier settlement it had been just a decade earlier, and the refined community it aspired to become as Eastern money and influence flowed westward along the newly completed Northern Pacific Railroad line. With a population that had swelled to nearly 800 souls, Selkerk represented everything that Americans in the late 19th century believed about opportunity, progress, and the endless possibilities of Western expansion. The main street buzzed with activity from dawn until well past sunset, freight wagons loaded with silver ore rumbling toward the railway depot. Well-dressed businessmen stepping off the evening train from Chicago and New York, and families who had traveled thousands of miles for the chance to build new lives in a place where a man's worth was measured by his determination rather than his pedigree. Yet beneath this veneer of prosperity and progress lay the same tensions that plagued communities throughout the American West. The rapid influx of money and people had created sharp divisions between the established families who had survived the lean early years and the newcomers who arrived with Eastern capital and sophisticated business connections. Labor disputes simmered constantly between the miners who risked their lives daily in the silver shafts and the investors who lived in comfort hundreds of miles away. Most troubling of all were the whispered concerns about young women who had arrived with their families but then mysteriously departed for opportunities in distant cities, leaving behind only vague explanations and tearful farewells. At the center of Selkerk's transformation stood Gabriel Thornfield, a man whose remarkable success story had become legendary throughout the territory, but was beginning to attract uncomfortable scrutiny from those who wondered how a simple dry goods merchant had accumulated such extraordinary wealth in such a short time. Gabriel had arrived in Selkerk during the brutal winter of 1892, driving a single wagon loaded with basic supplies and accompanied by his 7 daughters, his wife having died of pneumonia during their journey from Ohio. The sight of this determined widower and his children, huddled around a campfire in the bitter cold, had moved the established residents to offer assistance, and Gabriel had quickly established himself as both a shrewd businessman and a devoted father. Within 2 years, Gabriel's modest general store had expanded to become the largest commercial establishment between Butte and Missoula. He had negotiated exclusive contracts with mining companies, established trading relationships with suppliers in Chicago and San Francisco, and somehow secured the financing necessary to build the most impressive private residence in 3 counties, a 3-story Victorian mansion on Maple Street, with its elaborate gingerbread trim, stained glass windows, and wraparound porch. The 7 Thornfield sisters had grown into young women who were admired and respected throughout the community, each developing distinct personalities and talents that contributed to Selkerk's cultural and social life. Margaret, the eldest, possessed a sharp intellect and natural leadership abilities that had made her the most effective teacher the town school had ever employed. Catherine, just 2 years younger, had inherited their mother's artistic talents and had transformed them into a passion that enriched the entire community. The twins, Eleonora and Elizabeth, were inseparable companions who had channeled their natural ability with needle and thread into a thriving seamstress business that employed several local women. Sarah, blessed with a voice that could fill the Methodist church without strain, had become the heart of Selkerk's religious and charitable activities. Grace had demonstrated a mathematical ability that made her invaluable to her father's increasingly complex business operations. And Rebecca, the youngest, brought joy and laughter to everyone around her, with an infectious personality that could brighten even the darkest winter day. Yet the Thornfield family's prominence in Selkerk society had begun to attract attention that Gabriel found increasingly uncomfortable. Some residents whispered that his rapid accumulation of wealth suggested connections to powerful interests back east, while others questioned how a man who had arrived with virtually nothing had secured the financing necessary to build such an elaborate home and expand his business so dramatically. These suspicions intensified during the summer and early autumn of 1899, as Gabriel began hosting private meetings with well-dressed strangers who arrived on the evening train and departed before dawn, conducting their business in hushed conversations behind the closed doors of his study. The events of October 12, 1899, began with the kind of crisp autumn morning that made residents of Selkerk grateful for their decision to build lives in Montana's spectacular landscape. Gabriel Thornfield opened his general store at 7 sharp, as was his unchanging custom, while his daughters went about their established daily routines. Margaret walked to the one-room schoolhouse at 8, her leather satchel filled with the lesson plan she had prepared the evening before. Catherine set up her easel in the garden behind the family home, working on a landscape painting that captured the autumn transformation of the Bitterroot Mountains. The twins opened their seamstress shop at 9 and immediately began working on the elaborate wedding dress they were creating for Mayor Harrison's daughter. Sarah spent the morning at the Methodist church practicing hymns for the upcoming Sunday service. Grace worked in the general store alongside her father, and Rebecca helped the housekeeper with the household's daily cleaning. Yet subtle disturbances marked the sisters' behavior throughout the day. Margaret appeared distracted, responding to parents' greetings with polite but absent-minded nods rather than her typical warm engagement. Catherine seemed unable to concentrate on her painting, frequently setting down her brush to pace around the garden or stare toward the train station. The twins, normally cheerful, engaged in intense whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever customers entered the shop. Sarah repeatedly stopped mid-song to stare out the windows toward the main street. Grace made simple arithmetic errors that were completely unlike her normally flawless mathematical abilities, and Rebecca, normally carefree and talkative, seemed subdued, asking the housekeeper unusual questions about travel and whether it was possible to be happy when separated from everyone you loved. As the afternoon progressed, the disturbances became more pronounced. At approximately 3 o'clock, Dr. E. Samuel Porter encountered all 7 sisters walking together along River Street in the direction of the train depot, an unusual sight as their daily routines typically kept them occupied with individual responsibilities. What disturbed Dr. Porter most was their demeanor. Normally vibrant and talkative, the 7 young women moved in complete silence, their faces pale and their expressions troubled. They walked with mechanical precision, as if forcing themselves to complete an unpleasant but unavoidable task. When Dr. Porter called out a greeting, only Rebecca looked back, and the fear in her young eyes chilled him to the bone. The last confirmed sighting of the Thornfield sisters as a group came from Timothy Fletcher, the night clerk at the telegraph office, who observed them standing together beneath a street lamp at approximately 9:15 p.m. Instead of their usual work dresses, all 7 sisters were dressed in their finest garments, elaborate dresses more suitable for special occasions than an ordinary Thursday evening. Their hair was arranged with formality, and each wore jewelry Fletcher had only seen during church services or community celebrations. Most disturbing of all was their collective expression, resignation and fear, as if they were steeling themselves for an ordeal rather than anticipating a celebration. When Fletcher looked up again 10 minutes later, they had vanished. The hours that followed remain among the most puzzling aspects of the entire mystery. Gabriel Thornfield claimed he retired to his study at approximately 10 to review business correspondence, then went to bed at his normal hour of 11:30, assuming his daughters had already retired. The housekeeper, Mrs. Caldwell, had finished her duties and departed at 10, later testifying that an unusual quietness had pervaded the house, none of the sisters' voices could be heard, and the usual preparations for the next day had not been completed. The discovery that would transform the Thornfield disappearance from a family crisis into a nationwide mystery began at dawn on October 13th, when Mrs. Caldwell arrived to begin her daily routine. The house was eerily silent. The kitchen showed no signs of having been used for the sisters' customary evening tea. Climbing the stairs, Mrs. Caldwell found Margaret's bedroom precisely as it would have looked if she had never retired for the evening, the bed perfectly made, her nightgown hanging on its hook, her brush and comb on the dressing table. Yet subtle changes suggested the room had been searched. Books out of order, papers on the desk examined and restacked. The same impossible scene repeated in each sister's room. Beds untouched, nightgowns undisturbed, yet evidence of methodical searching. Sheriff William Harding's investigation confirmed Mrs. Caldwell's observations while deepening the mystery. Every door and window remained securely locked from the inside with no evidence of tampering. No footprints marked the soft earth around the house. Personal items had been examined and replaced, yet nothing was missing. Not valuables, not sentimental items, not even small sums of money. Interviews with residents revealed a pattern of strange occurrences in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. Well-dressed strangers had arrived on evening trains, conducting brief meetings before departing without engaging in normal social activities. The telegraph office reported an unusual volume of coded messages sent to addresses in Chicago, New York, and San Francisco, many dispatched by Gabriel himself. The bank president revealed large withdrawals of gold coins Gabriel had made following the mysterious visitors' arrivals, along with records showing payments from Eastern sources with no connection to his retail business. As federal investigators became involved, they uncovered connections between Gabriel and a secretive investment group known as the Rocky Mountain Development Company, which had been acquiring mineral rights using questionable methods. Gabriel's rapid accumulation of wealth coincided with questionable transactions involving mining claims and railroad contracts. Correspondence revealed he had been informed the organization demanded his daughters as compensation for their investments in his success. 23 years later, in 1922, a hidden room in a Chicago warehouse was uncovered during demolition, containing photographs of the Thornfield sisters, apparently taken after their disappearance, showing them at ages they never reached in Montana. The discovery exposed a vast criminal enterprise specializing in trafficking young women from frontier communities. The organization had operated through seemingly legitimate businesses, identifying vulnerable families and convincing parents they were providing opportunities for their daughters, while actually delivering them into forced marriages and servitude. Federal raids liberated dozens of women still held against their will and uncovered records documenting the sisters' fates. Margaret had been forced into marriage with a steel mill owner in Cleveland, Catherine with an art collector in Milwaukee. The twins, deliberately separated, were placed in St. Louis and Chicago. Sarah had died in 1905 after years of abuse in Detroit. Grace, exploited for her mathematical skills, died in childbirth in 1909. Rebecca, deemed too young for immediate placement, died of tuberculosis in 1907 after years of captivity. The mastermind behind the network, Marcus Peaton, was arrested in a dramatic raid. His trial revealed a sociopathic lack of remorse for the hundreds of lives destroyed. 17 associates were convicted, though many escaped justice through destroyed evidence or political connections. Margaret, now 49, chose to testify, her courage helping establish legal protections for future victims. Catherine and Elizabeth, still traumatized, maintained their assumed identities to protect their children. In Selkerk, the Thornfield mansion was torn down, the lot left vacant. The 7 marble headstones Gabriel had erected, bearing dates that marked their forced placements rather than deaths, were replaced with a single monument. The case led to nationwide reforms in missing persons investigations and protections against human trafficking, exposing how economic desperation and isolation had made frontier communities vulnerable to systematic exploitation. The tragedy of the 7 Sisters of Selkerk became a story about the price of the American dream and the moral failures that allowed such atrocities to occur. Their legacy endured in legal protections and societal awareness, ensuring their suffering would not be forgotten, a haunting reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the promise of the frontier.